Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. So welcome everyone to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton. I'm going to be your host and guide for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And I am really excited today because I've got another guest for you. And the guest is David Cox. David is an expert in media operations and team leadership. He has over 15 years leading teams at Sky and ViaPlay, and he has transformed broadcast operations at scale. Nowadays, he's focused on helping media leaders adapt to the future, utilizing our good old friend AI, helping them make data-driven decisions and creating high-performance teams to navigate change and stay competitive. So I wanted to invite David onto the show today because I think what he provides us with is some real life current examples of how to build high performing teams. So David, welcome to Impactful Teamwork. We are so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really excited. And when I came across all the things that you've been doing at ViaPlay, I was just like, this is somebody we need to have onto the podcast to share their experiences. And I know you and I have chatted prior to today. So perhaps you can just start by just giving a bit of context for the listeners about what are some of the challenges that you've experienced creating a high performance team. And really, I know that you took a team pretty much from chaos to cohesive, and just share with us some of the things along that journey that came up for you.
So as you say, I took over a pretty chaotic team. I joined the broadcast schedule operations team there. It was about 30 people, and I'd come from Sky, which was very different in scale and everything. And at that point, we were doing 9 TV channels. What my team did was schedule the TV channels. But when I was at Sky doing the same thing, we did the same kind of thing. But we didn't have 30 people doing like 9 channels. So I came there and go, why have we got 30 people doing this fairly small amount of channels? So off the bat, I wasn't sure. The team seemed bloated to me and they weren't very engaged. So yeah, that went on for a while. We had quite a lot of on-air errors as well. When we wanted to try and bring those down, there was a bit of success with that. And I think we reached a point where, okay, we've got to do something concrete here, something more structured. So I think about 2015, I had a management team. So I had 3 managers reporting into me and we had some supervisors. So we all got together and we had an away day in Swinley Forest. It was very nice, but it was very productive.
Yeah.
And that was where our idea that kind of birthed our leadership model that we used to base our change on. And then we also had a kind of philosophy underpinning that. And yeah, we took it from there. Change can't happen overnight.
Ooh.
When you've got that, the team's not fully engaged. Things aren't going that well. By this time also, we picked up 2 more channels. So I think the first part was just recognizing the fact that this is going to take a long time. There's no quick fixes.
And what I love about what you shared there was actually that it was this kind of collective realization that we needed to change things. And so often what we see in change and culture change within the organization is 1 or 2 people that decide it has to happen. But what I love from what you just shared there was this kind of collective approach that everyone realized it needed to change. And I'm sure that really helped expedite the process.
Yeah, it did. And it also helped coalesce the management team together as well. Over the period of years that we made this change, as the team size changed, so did the management team. But we were really close bunch and really focused on what we wanted to achieve.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. We often talk on the podcast about the importance of aligning everyone behind that shared purpose and that shared vision. And when we can get everybody on the same page, that's really the starting point from my perspective. And I'm guessing it is from yours as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty much the first thing that we decided when we had those conversations on that sunny afternoon in Swinley Forest. What is our target operating model going to be? Where do we want to get to? And of course, at that early stage, and you've already acknowledged it's going to take a while. So you don't know what the journey is going to be there. So you go, okay, this is where we're heading for. And we might have an idea where it's going, but in reality, there's going to be lots of twists and turns and changes and challenges. And that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love again what you said there, because it's that recognition, I can't even say it, of the fact that we need to be adaptable. There's something that we talk about in reinvention about an emergent strategy, because in kind of the old days we were like, we want to get to point B, for example, from A to B, but actually recognizing that B is more like a playing field and it's a kind of vision or an area that we want to get to, and we might not get to. The way maybe to think about it is, in the old days maybe we wanted to score the goal, actually now we just want to get the ball onto the pitch, right? Because that's is getting to where we want to go, because often with so much dynamic change, and we'll talk a little bit more about AI later on, is that things change and point B isn't where point B was when we started, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then even as you're approaching your goal, it's still even moving then as well, which we found. So when you start out, you have an idea of it being a linear event, that you'll do this, then this, and then you'll arrive at the destination. But even as you're approaching the destination, it still can be swerving all over the place. So in real terms, that might be because you make mistakes as you go along as well. You might have to roll certain things back, or maybe you hadn't anticipated how the team might react or individuals, a whole host of things. So even when you're getting there, things can change.
Yeah. And I love that what you were saying about you have to roll things back, because it's that realization that it's not a straight line and everything's curvy and wiggly woggly. And sometimes it means that we need to go backwards to go forwards, right? Because like you say, we won't always get it right. And I think that's a testament to the culture you would have been creating there, where we recognize that we've got, actually business nowadays is an experiment, right? For some things.
Yeah.
And we've got to experiment and we've got to try things, and some of them will work and some of them won't. And then how did you bring that into your culture, that your team members felt psychologically safe to try things and then recognize, actually, this didn't work and we need to take a different route?
That was actually one of the biggest challenges from doing this, was the culture change aspect, because sometimes you can talk about your team like at high level and you talk about them as if they're just like one mass, but actually they're all made up of individuals. It's like the iceberg, isn't it? You see the tips of it, but you don't know what's going on underneath all of it. And each person in your team is like an iceberg. We had that to contend with. One of the things I mentioned earlier, that we had a philosophy, which we managed to get the acronym TEAM, which stood for trust, emotional intelligence, accountability, and metrics. That was like our philosophy.
Wow.
Yeah, it worked out nicely. But one of the big parts of that was accountability, but that's what we wanted with the team. So what I said the team was like when we took over it and they weren't very engaged, we felt that part of improving that engagement was everybody, not just us being more accountable, but them as well. So we were influenced by, have you heard of the responsibility process by Christopher Avery?
No, that's not one I've come across. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Share with us a little
So,
bit about
yeah, I came across that and it was really interesting for that, focusing on accountability. It really resonated.
that.
And essentially, I'm probably going to mess up trying to explain this, but it's you visualize it like a continuum. So maybe at the bottom, it's your different personality type or the way you approach things. So, like down near the bottom, maybe you're in denial, you don't have any accountability or responsibility. But then the next stage up would be you're the type of person that tends to hold other people responsible, you blame them.
Mhm.
Then there's, I think, above that was justify, spend your time when things happen that's not great, you make a lot of excuses for why it's happened. Then there's shame, I think, which is where you blame yourself a lot. Then there's doing things where you feel obligated to do it. Oh, it's my job. I just have to do it, or I did it because that's what my job is. And then at the top end of the continuum is obviously responsibility, which is all the ownership and accountability.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, what Christopher Avery was saying in there, that allows you to create and choose and be the best version of you that can be.
Mhm.
So we took that on. We wanted to try and move people to that kind of thing because we thought that would help engagement.
Mhm.
And obviously, is the thing we always talk about in management and leadership circles is trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all overlaps, doesn't it?
Mm.
So that was a big influence on us for that.
Yeah, and I love that. We'll share in the show notes, everybody, Chris Avery's model there with some more detail and some signposting you towards some information for that. But it reminds me, as you're talking there about Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, where the base of that is trust before we get to constructive conflict, commitment, and then that accountability before results. It's interesting, a number of clients I've been working with recently, accountability is such a big challenge within organizations. And it seems
Yeah.
to me, I'm really fascinated with why people don't take accountability. Because for me, I guess it's just something I naturally do, but it's just very
Yeah.
interesting that so many people duck it. And if you got any insights on why do we think that people are kind of accountability averse?
I think some of it might be to do with how we define it. So
Mm,
I know with my team, we had to have some sessions talking about it because I think all too easily we roll in responsibility as being the same thing. So I think that was the hard thing for people to get their heads around. So we had to define it ourselves. So I think on very simple terms, we defined it as responsibility as something that can be given to you, that kind of thing. And we thought accountability is basically comes from you and doing what you've committed to do.
mm.
So that's how we defined the difference. And I think once you define it in those simple terms, people get to grips with it, understand it more, and perhaps accept it more.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. And I love those definitions because I was recently teaching a program actually on building accountability. And it was one of the things that came up and about the difference between this responsibility and accountability. And I think
Mm.
they do get very interchanged and merged within the workplace. People don't really understand the difference about how you can be responsible for part of the project, but the overall
Yeah.
accountability maybe lies with somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you talk there about trust, and I love your accurate acronym for teams because it's a team together everyone achieves more is the one I've always used. But I love that team in your world was trust, emotional intelligence, accountability, and metrics. I know we want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence again in the moment, but just talk to us a little bit about what were some of the things that you did to build trust within the team because it is foundational for everything, and without the trust, nothing else happens. So what were some of the things that you were doing within the team to help build that trust?
Okay. I think first, so I said it takes a number of years to get there. So before we did the things that I think that really switched the team to be high performing, we'd gone through some iterative changes, mainly in the way we did processes. But to build trust within the teams, I think to me it became an inescapable fact. There's whatever you try to do, whatever you read, whatever models you use, sometimes you just can't change people. Sometimes you just have to wait for people to leave that aren't going to get on board.
Mm.
And that was certainly the case. Of course, there are things you can do and things that we did do that did move it along and improve things. But I think you do have to acknowledge that in some cases, certain people do have to leave because I think some people get to points where they're at work and then they're not going to change for whatever reasons. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, what their personal circumstances or experience was. So we got there maybe after a year or two, some of those elements left the team. So then the important thing for building trust, which is related to that, and it was part of our 8-point leadership model, which was acquiring best talent, build that A team
Yeah.
kind of thing. So we sat and thought about, okay, what kind of people do we want in this team? And all too easily, recruitment or talent acquisition, when you're a busy manager or something, it can be a side thing. And you go, okay, we've got these interview questions and we'll ask these questions. And I came to the conclusion quite a long time ago that interview questions that I'd inherited, I didn't even know why I was asking them or what am I getting from asking these questions. So we looked at that, we ripped that up and said, we're not doing that anymore. And I think we collectively in the management team, we decided, look, we want to recruit for attitude. So because you can teach the job, but you need people who had the right attitude, particularly if we're trying to get people to be more accountable and trust each other and things like that. So our way of doing it was, okay, we want to see insights to what they're like as a person. So we decided we were going to have like a recruitment day or half day. We'd have everybody in at the same time. They'd all be in the room at the same time. We split up into 3 things. I'd do an introduction. We gave them a task, although they didn't know it was a task. I basically put pen and paper in front of them and I talked about ViaPlay and what we did and everything. And then I asked some questions. So then you could see, okay, are they the type of person that takes notes? So the people who took notes did well. Then we had a thing where they all had to work together. So I had these 4 scenarios that I got off the internet. One of them was like, you've crash landed on the moon. You've got these 20 items and you have to come to a consensus to prioritize them to be able to escape the moon. So we would sit there and then you can watch them and how they interact with each other and you get an insight to their personality. There might be the quiet person, and the quiet person might obviously doesn't say that much, but when they do speak, it might be something really valuable or really important to what it is. But you get someone who might talk all the time, and maybe some of the things they say are not so important. And we saw as well, one of the things we saw every time, you get certain people who try to keep things to time. So they had 15 minutes to do it. And that gives you insights to what they're like with what we were doing, which was scheduling, which is all based on pushing
Yeah.
and pulling time in a day.
Yeah.
Having someone who's time minded was quite interesting as well. So we did that. And then we'd finish it off with some short interviews. And they weren't structured interviews, they were conversations based on the person. We basically sat down and had a chat with them. I know people could have an opposing view to that, saying, okay, everyone should have the same interview and the same questions and everything, which I have done before, but we liked and got more value from having that kind of conversational format, and it made people feel more comfortable as well.
Yeah. And I love that you were talking there about hiring for attitude rather than skills. And I
Mm.
think in today's world where skills are becoming obsolete quite quickly, if we're really honest with I, and the rate of general technology change, some of the skills that we needed 2 or 3 years ago are not needed today in the same way, but they're needed in a different way. I've always been a proponent of the fact that I can teach people. When I was in corporate, the division I was running, we were doing something quite unique. Nobody else was doing it. So the skills per se weren't there that I could hire off the shelf. But what I could have were people that were good communicators. And that was coming over in their attitude and how they showed up. So I'm
Exactly.
always a big proponent of hiring for how people are going to show up and how they're going to fit into our culture, right? Because you talked earlier on about John Maxwell calls them the law of the bad apple, the people that don't fit into the organization. I love that Zappos approach, which certainly was in the past, and I assume they're still doing it now, was if they hire people, if they're not fitting in at the end of 30 days, they pay them off to leave because they recognize that
Yeah.
actually that one detrimental person is so impactful on the organization. And as you were talking earlier on, I was thinking there was another company, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it is, and I'll have to go research it, that did exactly that. They were changing a whole load of stuff in the organization. They said, some of you won't be on board with this, and we would rather pay you to go than stay
Mm.
and be part of this and be disruptive. And I thought
It's in America.
that was an American company as well, I believe.
And that's the thing. You see those, when we were doing our management model, we took inspiration from the Netflix way as well,
Hmm.
because they used to publish that and we had a look
Yeah.
through that. And one of their things was about hiring and then knowing when to cut
Mm.
people. But obviously in the UK, you can't really follow that because of the employment laws here. So I found when I've looked at those American models or the way some American companies work, you can't do it exactly the same way they
No,
do.
you've got to be careful. I had
Uh,
somebody I hired when I was in my corporate role who ended up not being a good fit. And it basically took me about a year to counsel them out.
yeah.
And actually sometimes these people actually know that they're not a good fit in the organization, but sometimes we're not brave enough to have the conversation. Actually, we do them a favor when we
Mm.
do. But anyway, so let's just talk and just shift the conversation a little bit to AI, because that's something that's really
Mhm.
topical right now for
Yeah.
everybody. What are some of your thoughts on, because in some spheres there's like, oh, AI, I'm going to lose my job and stuff. I
Yeah.
have a very different view. Let's share with us your view on AI, how that's going to impact
Mhm.
jobs and roles for people within organizations and within teams.
So I would say, an optimistic approach to
Hmm.
AI. It is, if you go on YouTube or social media things and you see all these headlines saying, all these people are going to lose their jobs because of some new developments. I think a couple of months ago, there was one where there's an AI tool that can, within a few seconds, do some music jingles or something like that. And that's someone's entire career doing those things. And they're saying, okay, that's completely wiped out that industry. And it's easy to fall in with that. But I think if you look under the surface with most of AI tools, they're not quite there. So yeah, the, it may be able to create music or an AI may be able to write something or whatever, but they all need refining.
Yeah.
They need some human interaction with them to make them really good. That's the whole thing with AI writing when people are talking about CVs or cover letters. Don't copy and paste what ChatGPT put out because it's not perfect. It's not quite there. It needs refining. You can spend more time refining it than you would have done writing it, but the
Yeah.
advantages there of it as a tool are maybe for other things. Like I was saying earlier, I'm quite verbose, so if I write a cover letter, it might end up 2 pages, but ChatGPT, for instance, might be able to cut it down to 1 page or something. It's helping there. It's not writing the letter for me. I've put the input in there, so it's a refining thing, and that's generally what I think with most AI tools is they're not replacing humans necessarily.
Mm.
It's a tool, a very human component to it. Just started reading a book called The AI Savvy Leader
All right.
by, I think the author's called David, and that's very good because he's got this list. Because I haven't finished the book, I can't list all the
Yeah.
things out, but he's got these 9 points. And the book's basically written for leaders to go, look, the main problem with AI implementation is that leaders are not really involved. They've given it to the tech people
Yeah.
to own. They don't want to be involved. He's saying, look, if you want AI to be successful in your business, the leaders have to be there deciding. It's going back to that thing. What's the target operating model? What are we doing this where people who are working in the tech environments, they're not following those kind of approaches. They're focused on creating it or using it. Um, so his focus in the book is as well is that the role of people, it may not replace your role, it's your role might change, and that's something I think I very much strongly agree with. I think I did a post on it not long ago on LinkedIn
Yeah.
where, you know, you're you the manager role may not go, but it will change rather than being hands-on or making decisions, things like that. The manager role with AI coming in might be more focused on creating culture, coaching people, those kind of things. So that's what I think, generally, very broadly speaking, AI will change roles, not necessarily get rid of them. Of course, some people are going to lose jobs and maybe some types of role will go, but I think mostly it's going to change roles. It didn't get rid of all car workers. There's still humans in there working it. It changed their jobs. Some people lost their jobs, but yeah, sometimes I think it's a bit scaremongery or clickbaity. You see these headlines that whole job roles and everything are going to be eradicated by AI. I tend to look at it positively.
I agree, actually. What's exciting about AI is some of the grunge stuff we have to do in our jobs can actually be automated. For us as humans and members within teams, there's the opportunity to do a lot more exciting things that add real value. And I think then we start being able to see team members becoming even more empowered because they're actually doing things. They're not having to spend all their time filling in Excel spreadsheets or something because you just give the data check
Yeah.
to happy days. Now you add the value by analyzing it, and they're the more interesting things to do. So actually, I think collectively, I see businesses almost operating at a higher level because some of the stuff at the bottom is automated, and actually we do the value add stuff, which hopefully
Yeah.
more people would find more engaging and more interesting to do.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree with that. That's how I see
um,
it too.
okay, awesome. And yeah, I'm just looking at time. Let's just talk a little bit because I know you and I spoke on our pre-call about emotional intelligence, and obviously it's the E of your word team.
Yeah.
A lot of talk out there in the marketplace about emotional intelligence. What's your view on it? How important is it for leaders to have good emotional intelligence? Is it a bit of a hype? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's a bit of a hype. I think the way I've always approached it is that it's people centered and data driven. I think if you go too much data wise, you can lose people. So the people aspect's always been really important to me. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier is that recognition and acceptance that you deal with everybody as an individual. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about seeing people as icebergs and all the stuff that's under there. So it's basically it's nothing magical or anything. It's just talking to people, getting to know them. The more you talk to them, the trust builds. They open up more. You open up more with them. I think it helps as well as a leader for them to open up if you show a bit of vulnerability as well. I certainly did that and being open. And yeah, you find that people will trust you more with their opinions. So I found it particularly valuable in team meetings. It used to be I used to stand up there and I used to just talk at them and no one would interact. Then trust was getting slightly better. And then you'd get one or two voices and it'd be the same people dominating conversations. And it was always like, I want it to be all interactive, get rid of the layers really, and we can all talk on the same level. But you can't make that happen. And doing the private one-to-one chats, that's how we got there to bring more engagement in those team meetings. I knew if we discuss something in a team meeting and you've got people that aren't speaking, I'd make sure that I'd bring it up in the one-to-one. Or sometimes before I would say, this is what we're going to talk about in the meeting. What's your perspective? Knowing that they probably wouldn't raise it. So I could maybe raise it so their kind of voice was heard. It's just the power of one-to-ones and building that trust and openness. And we found as we did that, people would open up more in the teams, and we got to a point where I would say probably 90% of the team would all interact in a face-to-face team meeting and give their views and everything. To begin with, some of the things were quite funny actually to get people to talk because you still had the domineering people, so
Sure.
they'd talk over maybe a quiet person and things like that. So that some points, and people were having separate conversations. So we were like, okay, we're going to get a stick here,
Yeah.
and whoever holds the stick can talk, you know. And then once you start doing something silly like that, people realize, yeah, it got to a good point. And we had, again, with the interview technique, those quiet people, yeah, they didn't speak a lot in the meeting, but when they did, their point was usually really good.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And I love the talking stick because that's an old African American ritual. I use that quite a lot too. And it's very powerful. Just the only person who can speak is the person. I usually have a stuffed horse that I throw around the
Yeah,
room, but it's very powerful. But I love that because what I'm taking away from our conversation here, David, is the high performing team. A lot of it comes down to building trust, creating that psychological safety. And that's coming from having one-on-one conversations, getting to know your people and what they need, getting to know the bit of the iceberg underneath, so that you can really start creating experiences within the workplace that meet the needs of our team members. And then they're going to be more engaged. And I think when they feel like that and they understand that vision of where we're going to, they're more likely to have that accountability and commitment to do what we want them to do because they see how that fits into the whole picture.
exactly. And that's exactly what happened with us. We did have those people that when we made the change, they didn't want to roll with it. So where we were going for our definition of a high performing team, it involved creating essentially a self-managing team where they'd all work collectively with each other. And some people weren't happy with that. And that's why we had those one-to-one talks. They didn't want to talk about it in the team meeting. And they were just saying, look, I'm just not, I like having my work given to me. I like having a rota.
Mhm.
I don't want to go in and pick my work out and claim tasks and things like that. So then through those conversations, and that's where I was talking about where we had to roll things back. We did move too fast on some things and I had to roll them back. And that was as a result of those conversations. Some people weren't ready. It doesn't mean people will never get there. Most people just need a bit of time to adjust, and they do eventually. And I've got to say, when you do, you just get feeling when you've reached that point, it's a high performing team, and it's just like really satisfying. It feels like everything just clicks into place.
Mhm.
You've got the trust there, the engagements there. They enjoy being in each other's company. In hybrid setting that we had as well, they worked well remotely as well, but worked together but remotely. It's just that feeling of everything clicking into place. But I think one thing I would like to probably say before we finish talking about getting to the high performing teams is I think, and I've been there myself, never underestimate the leader
Yeah.
or the manager's roles in these teams. So as I was saying, we got to a point where it was a fairly self-managing team. We weren't doing rotas or giving them the work. They had their tools. They did it. They know what they had to do. And you think, oh, I don't have as much to do anymore. And if you take the leadership out of that, it's amazing how quickly things unravel. I have seen that happen. So I think even if you're not doing some of the things that you did in a more directive leadership way, there's this unseen or silent thing that kind of makes everything work and holds it all together.
And I love what you said there because I think that is so important. And I know with a lot of leaders I talk to, I would say to leaders, almost you want to make, not literally, your role redundant. We want to be able to empower all of our team. And actually, your role becomes that more of an orchestrator.
Yes.
Imagine a conductor there orchestrating all the different pieces. If you took the conductor away from that orchestra, all of it suddenly it starts imploding. But what we do see, you've experienced this as well, I know I certainly have, is that we've done such a good job of creating that high performance team, that orchestra. All of a sudden, they're like, you don't have a role anymore, Julia. Thank you. And then, like you say, nobody's got anyone to follow and give the direction about what to do. And it's so important that that role is there. And that's what the leader's role is to do, is to inspire and
Yeah.
motivate and direct people
Yeah.
in of what to do. And if you take it apart, the orchestra just the team just crumbles from what you've had, which is
Yeah. I like that analogy of the conducting the orchestra. Works really well.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that just came to me as we were talking, but I can just see, I know from my first-hand experience how that's happened when I've seen stuff. And that's the foolhardy bit of Creating a high performance team is almost like you want to create yourself out of a role, but not literally, because actually you
Yeah.
are doing the role. You're just doing it in a different way, and you're not so hands on. And yet so many leaders that I've been talking to, particularly recently, are actually struggling to get into that conductor role because they want to be hands on and doing everything, because they've got a bit of fear that if they don't keep doing things, then what role are they going to do? And it's always interesting because the more you can get your team to do things and be empowered and take that accountability that we've been talking about and be high performing and work cohesively together, actually gives you as the leader the opportunity to grow and develop and move to a different level, which is really rewarding for you.
Yeah, precisely. I think that goes back to what we were talking about with the AI. The role changes. So as we came to that high performing team, we as the managers in our team, we had to change our roles, but actually it gave us more time to focus on refining the team, making those things, because we had the approach of continuous improvement. You have the time to do that and focus on it, and it actually helps you make the team even better. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, and it gives you that strategic thinking time that most leaders say they don't have time for,
Exactly. Yeah.
and gives you the opportunity to start the continuous improvement, continuing to reinvent the business so that we stay ahead of the game and we don't become one of those casualties along the way that we've seen so many firms like Netflix, like Nokia, like Kodak, all of those, because probably they didn't have enough strategic time and the vision to step away from the operation and see those things. So that's what's so important. Wow, David, we have had a long conversation, but that's amazing. It's been so interesting. So I just want to thank you for your time today. But listeners, please do connect to David. His contact details will be in the show notes. I think he's shared with us such wisdom on his firsthand experiences of creating a high performance team, which I'm incredibly grateful for. So thank you. My request to you, or my invitation to you this week, is what main lesson are you taking away from what David shared? And what are you going to be putting into practice this week to help transform your team into a high performance cohesive team? Thank you so much again for your time and attention today, David. Thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, will see you on the next edition in a week or so's time. All right. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?